were an extraordinary company to work with. I mean, we produced our Broken Sword game on PlayStation 1. And I have to say, I have such fond memories of working with Sony. They were very dynamic, they were very exciting. And what they did is they made the PlayStation an incredibly trendy machine. They went into nightclubs, they went around universities, they got, you know, young adults playing, and grew the market enormously. And the interesting thing is, looking back, what we sort of should have been obvious but wasn't, was that actually we were alienating, but that the PlayStation coming in with its much more visceral gameplay and its 3D, you know, the fact that almost all games were 3D, it actually drove out a lot of the more casual gamers who enjoyed the type of adventures that we wrote, who enjoyed the more cerebral games. But the reason that we didn't notice, nobody really noticed, was because the rate at which new people came into gaming was much higher than the rate at which people were leaving because they didn't like the way that it had changed. And I think that's quite an important understanding to see why we are where we are now. So, as I said, we wrote Broken Sword, but just very quickly to put it in context, to go through to explain Revolution and what we've done. Having initially worked at Arctic Computing, writing adventure games, and then worked for US Gold, and then I worked for Activision for a bit. I founded Revolution in 1990, and this is our first game, which is called Lure of the Temptress. And it was released in 1992. As I said, 10, 15, 20,000 pounds to write. Our second game was a game called Beneath the Steel Sky, and I'm going to come on to that because that was recently re-released on iPhone. Then our first, real blockbuster was a game called Broken Sword that some of you will know. Very cartoon, much more expensive to write. Then after that, Broken Sword 2 in 1997. Then quite a gap, and we moved to 3D. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But Broken Sword 3 was a full 3D game, and then more recently, 2006, Broken Sword 4. We have done other projects, but they've been forgotten in the midst of time, so I won't mention them. So that brings us on to the new millennium. And the interesting thing is that we started the millennium in the absolute certainty, in the absolute knowledge that things would go on with the hardware cycles that had happened before. And we knew that it was going to be a technology battle, as it had been for the PlayStation 2 and indeed the PlayStation, against the Dreamcast and etc. And we knew that the big fight was going to be between PlayStation 3 with the superior technology, but Xbox 360 was more usable, and programmers were finding it easier to program, and it came out first. So it was just obvious because it had happened every time. We knew our audience. We rather fancied the idea that it was women scantily clad holding joysticks. But actually, it didn't happen that way. And the reason it didn't happen that way is that Nintendo came along, and as they always do, they upset and they created the unexpected. While the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 were incredibly expensive bits of kit, both to the consumer, but even more expensive to manufacture. So right from day one, they were losing $100 or so on each piece of each console they sold. Nintendo came along and said, well, we're not going to compete in that. We're just going to have the new controller. We're going to have the touchscreen with the DS, and we're going to make a profit on every piece of hardware that we sell from day one. And we're going to be the primary developer of this as well. So nobody really saw that coming. I don't know, I certainly didn't. And it meant that actually the audience has now begun to fragment. And it's a bit of a crappy picture, but this is our audience. It is across gender, it's across the age group. And what's really happened is that we've found that the market is sort of splitting between the hardcore, who still will be very happy to pay £50 for a top-end game, and the more casual gamer who actually won't pay that sort of money, but doesn't want the same level of production value. And that's a sort of profound difference that's happened in the market. And I see very shortly, within the next, probably by next Christmas, we're going to have, I think, a dozen, 15 games that cost 30, 40, 50, 60 million dollars to produce, sell in the shops for 40, 50 pounds, and then that's going to be it. Because the rest of the games that are not blockbusters just now lose the publishers so much money. And frankly, I mean, you can go next door and you can see most of the games that are going to be successful, and that are going to have the sequels, whether it be Grand Theft Auto, whether it be Assassin's Creed, or whatever. These are the real blockbusters. And there are going to be very few of those. But there are going to be, and there are already, thousands of games that are going to be cheaper, that are going to be more like the indie scene, which are going to cost anything from, as they do on iTunes at the moment, 79p up to £10. And that's the profound change that's been happening over the last year and will only accelerate. And obviously the reason that that's been able to happen is the advent of digital distribution, which we always looked at it and we always imagined you could see it coming over the hill. We sort of expected, but actually the change has been even more profound than I think we thought that it was going to be. And as an independent developer, Revolution is still independent. For us, it makes a huge difference because the value chain, if you have a boxed product, is that the retailer and the distributor tend to take about 50% of what's earned from a sale, and that's not to even mention the second-hand market, which is a different subject altogether. And then the publisher tends to pay the developer about 20% of the 50% that they get. So the developer ultimately gets 10%. And given that games are now so expensive, as a developer, it is almost impossible now to earn profits because we just never recoup. It's just a fact. It's the way that it works. By going down the digital distribution route, everything's changed. And Apple will pay 70%. They will take. They see it as a very different service, so they'll keep 30% for providing the service and pay the developer the 70%. So it's a totally profound change in the way that the market works. Now that's not to say that I'm in any way anti-retailers or publishers or distributors. And I think for the expensive, super expensive products, it's absolutely going to be and will always be, a banker or a very successful publisher funds it. It then goes through the distribution channels. It goes through the retailers, etc., etc. But at the other end, where you've got the cheaper games, the cheaper to sell, cheaper to develop, you're going to find that actually you can go directly to the developers, and because there aren't so many people in the middle, and because there isn't this block at retail of the fact that you can only have 40 or 50 or 60 games or whatever it is, or 100 games, on iPhone at the moment, I think they've got 16,000 apps. So it really is opening up opportunities that just never existed before. And if you think about the music industry just didn't accept that this was going to happen. They were fought, the record labels, who were very, very comfortable, fought against digital distribution and got destroyed. It got washed away. And the same thing is happening to an extent in films. But the exciting thing as a content creator, as the creator, the developer, is that we can look at the way that the music industry has adapted. So, the Arctic Monkeys, as many of you will know, gave away their songs so that then they would become popular and draw people to their gigs. And now their gigs are incredibly well attended. Another example is Radiohead, whose album In Rainbows they released for free, and you paid what you thought it was worth, which sounds extraordinary, but they also sold a disc box for 40 quid as well. So the hardcore fans were always going to go and buy that 40 quid. And they were selling to people that probably wouldn't have bought it otherwise. And even if they give you £1 or £2, not only do you get extra revenue, but you also then you build your fan base. So it's a really, really important that that from every aspect that we understand how that's changing, and also as gamers, that your choice is now so much wider than it ever was before.